welcome to Find, Tell, Share, the Storytellers podcast. I'm Jemma Rosenthal and my business is Creative Hearts. I'm a life coach, singer-songwriter, dancer and actress. And on this show, we talk about everything storytelling. And this is my co-host.
I'm Chris Sissons and my business is Market Together. I'm a local marketing coach who specialises in storytelling for business owners. Today we're recording in unbelievable heat. We're all melting, but stay tuned because we're going to be looking at how we help men find contentment. What does it mean to be lucky? And lost cities and writing over the past. So, Jemma.
Yes, and this time we're delighted to introduce our guest, Willie Nicol of Contentment Life Coaching. Willie has gained a Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of Glasgow, Scotland, before enjoying a career as a police officer for 31 years. This was followed by 7 years in corporate security management before he was made redundant. He then decided to draw on his wide-lived experience and numerous acquired skills to set up his own coaching business, Contentment Life Coaching, as a personal development and transformational coach. Now, over 4 years on, he's a certified life coach, hypnotherapist, and practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. Willie works with clients to help them find their own solutions to stress, anxiety, anger, low confidence, or whatever else is blocking their development or stopping them achieving the results they really want. Hi, Willie, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jemma. I'm very glad to be here, and thank you also to Chris. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you today.
It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. So you do NLP, which is a form of life coaching I've also trained in myself. So if you want to just explain to the listeners a little bit about what NLP is, just in case they don't know what it is, in your own words.
Okay, neuro-linguistic programming. It does sound a wee bit scary, as if it's some form of mind control. However, it's far from that. It is a methodology of being able to change how you think for the better. So if I break it down to neuro, simplistically, it's what's going on in your head, what your thinking is. Linguistics is just the use of languages and language structure. And programming is the scary part. But it's not programming. It is, if you will, resetting, upgrading, or changing the way you think, using linguistic patterns for a better outcome. We do it all the time as human beings. We use certain words which probably don't serve us very well. But if we substitute other words, we have a much better outcome. For example, if I say I need to go to the gym, or I must go to the gym, or I have to go to the gym, that's not very good linguistically, and it's also not very good for the outcome we want, which is to be fitter, because no one likes to be told what to do, even when we tell ourselves what to do. So very simply, if we change these words to I want to, I will, I'm going to, you take away the embedded command and replace it with a desire, which is much more likely to succeed in my going to the gym and achieving the outcome I want, which is to be fitter. That's a very simple explanation of changing a language pattern for a better outcome.
Yeah. I love how the use of language as well. It's kind of we're a storytellers podcast here, and we talk a lot about language and how we can use it to improve our stories. And with NLP, it's a way to improve the story in your head, the story you're telling yourself.
Yes, very much so. We as humans tell ourselves a lot of stories, and very often they're negative because we're kind of wired for negativity. So if we can replace the negative stories with more positive stories, for example, when faced with a challenge, we might get down the negative route saying, oh, I can't do that. I'll never accomplish that. That's too difficult. We're already halfway to defeat. However, should we choose to change the language and say, I will do that. I'm going to achieve that. That's possible. I'll do it. It creates an internal feeling of desire to achieve that goal, as opposed to, oh no, I can't do it. So language is hugely important, particularly when we talk to ourselves, as we often do.
I'm very excited about the example that you gave, Willie, there. There was something on the radio this morning about sports and exercise, and everybody knows that when you exercise, your muscles generate lactic acid, and that makes the muscles ache and grow tired. But what they were arguing is that that's not actually true. I mean, it's physiologically true, but for example, why do sports people generally do better when they're competing than when they're on their own? And one of the things he said is, if you're out walking and you're beginning to get short of breath and your muscles start aching, you can think, oh dear, I'm getting very tired, I better stop. Or you can think, actually, I'm increasing my lung capacity and strengthening my muscles, so I'll carry on. Probably not in this weather, but generally. I mean, would that be an example?
Very, very much so. Exercise is a great thing. As you say, it releases lactic acid, also releases feel good chemicals like endorphins, right? And that's why, generally speaking, after a period of exercise, we feel better. It's almost the same as having a good laugh. We are stimulating feel good hormones, chemicals, neurotransmitters within ourselves. Um, and yes, there are times when, if we're soaring out of breath, it is time to stop. But if you push through that, and as you say, Chris, this is doing me good. I am developing bigger lung capacity, bigger muscles. And again, we've got that positive outcome instead of saying, oh, I'm going to give up now.
So can you explain why you chose specifically to work with men, and what is it that, so first of all, because when Chris said about finding contentment for men, and then immediately in my female brain, I'm thinking, well, don't men already have contentment? But then obviously they don't, because everyone's, well, you explain, what is it that you feel that men don't have contentment in? Like, what is it that men are trying to find that you feel that your coaching can help them to give in this world?
Thank you, Gemma. Contentment is a nebulous concept because you can't walk into Tesco's and buy a jar of it. My contention is, though, that you should know when you don't have it. And when I was setting my business up, during the process of becoming a coach, I found a great deal of contentment, and it just popped into my head to call my business Contentment Life Coaching. And through a series of changes, if you like, I realised, because I had been one, that a lot of men are not as contented as they could be. Because men, particularly men of a certain age like me, don't like opening up. They don't like admitting they have problems or obstacles or issues. And I don't use these words normally. I just use things. Everyone's got things. They don't like to admit their things because we're men. We're big macho types. And um, we don't like opening up.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because I know a lot of men do find it difficult to open up, and they have problems, and they don't always want to admit they're having problems. So how do you get them to admit and then to start to work on it?
Well, that's the challenge, Gemma. I was that man. I worked in a very macho profession as a police officer and even in security. Um, and I recognised that I wasn't very good at opening up. And I've come across many clients who are in a similar boat. There comes a point where circumstances either oblige them to do something, or they have a realization internally that they want to change. So it might be an external cause, or it might be an internal cause. And once they've opened up, which I regard not as a sign of weakness, but it's actually as a sign of strength. You've realised you have a problem, a thing. You've admitted it to yourself. You may have tried to fix it yourself. That hasn't worked. And then the realisation is, I need help with this. And once that acknowledgement has been made, they come and talk to me.
Yeah, so it's almost like a psychological process where you have to first realize there's a problem and then have the willingness to ask for help and come to someone like you for that help.
Very much so. I had one young man who was going through a difficult period of his marriage, and he realised he wasn't coping well. And because I knew his father recommended me to him, and he came to see me. We worked our way through that. That, if you like, was partly external, partly internal. But all he knew was that he needed help to get through what he was going through, and I was there to provide that help.
Do you have a sort of set standard of what contentment is, or is that individualized depending on the person? So do you come in with a sort of idea of what you're going to be working on with each person, or is it kind of that you ask them, what do you believe contentment is for you, and then work towards that?
Generally, what I start off by doing is ask them what they want and why they don't have it just now, and how can we get to that point of what they want. Ultimately, when they reach that point, that's where the contentment is. So it can vary from person to person. But essentially, I'll ask them what they want. They will tell me what that is. Let's call it an outcome or a result. And that outcome or result, once achieved, is what brings the contentment.
And how easy is it for some people to achieve? How many sessions do you normally have before someone's achieved something that they're wanting, or does it vary?
It varies. A very early client, I did a 12-week program with him because he was very far from contented. And again, by coincidence, it was a marital situation. But after the 12-week program, he was a much happier, more contented man. And funnily enough, nearly 9 months later, he contacted me to tell me that he'd achieved the level of contentment he was going for. So it's not a quick fix. I do not have a magic wand. Other occasions where possibly the things that are troubling them aren't quite as deep seated, there may be a 4 session solution or a 6 session solution. It all depends on the individual and what they present with.
Do you have any advice for any men that may want to start making a change but don't know where to start? And what would you say were the kind of key aspects to making that change? That's kind
Well,
of two questions in one.
as I've alluded to, there has to be a realization that something's not right, something's not working well in their lives. And that self awareness probably leads on to the next step, which is I need to do something about this. That then leads on to what am I going to do? And generally, there'll be an effort to sort the issue out themselves. And if that doesn't work and they get frustrated, they then have to come to the realization I need some assistance with this. So, as I said earlier, it's a kind of process, as you say, like a step by step process where they end up with I need help. And that's when they come to me, we have a discussion, and we see how I can help them get to where they want to be. And where they want to be is what leads to them being happier and more contented.
So you mentioned marital problems, and we also mentioned fitness. Would you say they're the kind of top problems that people come to? I mean, if you were to say like the top three or or 5 problems that people come with, what would you say they were in terms of men? What are the things that they're wanting to change?
Top 3, I would say, would be stress, anxiety, and low confidence.
So it's not even external things.
Well, generally there's an external catalyst for it. And I happen to mention that 2 of my clients were going through a marital situation. But it's generally an external catalyst what causes the anxiety, stress, or whatever, which also leads to the absence of or minimal contentment. So we address if you would, the symptoms: anxiety, stress, low confidence, low motivation. Get to the bottom of what's causing that, which might be a marital situation, or a work situation, or a sporting situation, or whatever. And once we've addressed the symptoms and we've, shall we say, knocked these in the head, then we can move on. The next stage being, having solved these things, where do we want to go next? So I have a new program called Be Less, Be More, Be Better, and Be Growing, which is be less stressed, anxious, and worried, be more confident, motivated, and self assured, be better as a parent, person, partner, whatever, and continue that process by continually growing into the better version you want to be. And that process will lead you to contentment. That's my philosophy anyway.
Well, thank you for sharing your philosophy, and I'm sure there's some little nuggets in there for our listeners. Chris, do you have any other questions you want to add for Willie today? Being a man yourself,
Being a man myself, yes.
would you say you're pretty contented? How would you say your level of contentment is at the moment?
Mine,
Mm.
yeah. Well, I think I am. Like Willie, I was made redundant. I was made redundant. When was it? 2011, I think. So I've had 11 years to sort
Sort
myself
it out.
out. And I'm reasonably happy with the life that I have at the moment. I mean, the only thing that bothers me is that maybe I'm getting complacent, which I'm sure is not quite the same as contentment.
That's a good problem to have, though, I guess.
Yes.
Because it just means that you want to do more, as in something different. Is that how you would describe it?
Yeah, I suppose
Out of your comfort zone.
Yes.
So what would you suggest, Willie, if Chris had come to you for a life coaching session and he said, I'm getting a bit complacent, what would you suggest?
Well, I think we would have to look at why that's the case. If comfort zone, you mentioned comfort zone, a well-known phrase, and if we remain in our comfort zone, we're not going to progress or grow or develop. So my view is that it's a good idea to push out of your comfort zone. Even if you just tip a toe out of your comfort zone, you're at least making some sort of progress. So achievement is a marvellous thing. When you've achieved something, do you feel a sense of accomplishment? And by that extrapolation, contentment? Yes, you do. So comfort zone is a nice place to be, but not necessarily the best place to be.
Mm. So going on to your story now, you have a story to tell about how you became a life coach from a police officer. So off you go.
Thank you, Gemma. I left university, looked about for something I wanted to do. I was getting married very shortly thereafter, so I needed a steady income, and I joined the police. Wasn't necessarily my first choice, but I ended up spending 31 years as an officer, so it must have been okay. And during that time, I performed a lot of different roles, undertook quite a lot of activities, some of which I can't tell you about or I'd have to shoot you. Covert policing. Uh, I carried a firearm at one point in my career, stood next to the Queen and various other members of the royal family, which was very interesting, but we don't have a lot of time to go into that. And participated in a lot of very major inquiries, murders, terrorist incidents, and so on and so forth. So when I retired, I looked about for something that was going to be challenging, and it was. I had a large area to cover. I worked for a multinational cash management company, and my eyes were opened in private industry as I'd been rather, I don't know, cushioned in the police because we were very supportive and very integrated, whereas in private industry, not so much. Um, then the threat of redundancy loomed over my head, and I was naturally not very happy. And my lovely wife suggested I look at coaching, which I didn't want to do because I didn't believe in it. And here, 5 years later, I'm coaching. However, she persuaded me to go on a little coaching course, an introduction to coaching, which, to be fair, I attended with the sole purpose of debunking this myth. And 3 days later, I changed my mind. So when I was eventually made redundant, I was a lot calmer than I had been when the news had broken. And having gone for a few interviews, I had the light bulb moment that I didn't want to be doing this sort of job anymore. And again, in consultation with my lovely wife, why don't you try coaching? So I took my redundancy money, studied in NLP, hypnotherapy, coaching, and various other things, and then made the horrendous decision to start a business with absolutely no business experience, which was challenging. However, I had some very good friends who supported me and helped me, and took the plunge and started Contentment Life Coaching probably about 4 years ago. And a little anecdote that I really like telling is that by pure chance, I met a colleague that I hadn't seen for 25 years. And he and I had been buddies, partners, if you like, many, many years ago in the police service. I had joined a few years before him and I ended up being his trainer. So the interesting thing was that he was 6'6" and I'm 5'10". So we made a very odd couple patrolling the main streets of Glasgow. Anyway, we meet up and he asked me, my goodness, what have you done? And I told him what I'd done in my career. What are you doing now? I'm coaching. I've set up a coaching business. At which point he laughed at me, which I thought was rather rude. His name was Eddie. I said, Eddie, that's a bit rude. And he continued laughing. And I nearly got a bit narked. However, he said, Willie, you coached me. I saw you coaching other people. You just didn't know you were doing it. And I was absolutely gobsmacked at that. And then the realization was, yes, I did do that. I did support people. I did help people. And I've been doing it all my life. So that was an affirmation, if you like, or confirmation that I'd taken the right step. And that has only been constantly reaffirmed in the intervening 4 years, where I have enjoyed enormously helping people with whatever challenges they face. And it's been great for me because I have grown as a result of it. And you may know yourself, Gemma, that a client, even though they have things going on, always brings something to the party. And it means that while they're growing, you're also growing. So
Yeah.
it's a win-win, win-win-win situation. And even better is that I get paid for it. And to have lovely testimonials and reviews is just an added bonus. So where I am today is where I probably should have been many years ago had I only known that benefit's a wonderful thing. And I am contented now in my life and in my role in helping other people. So that's a very brief bio, my history, my story.
Well, thank you, Willie. That what struck me listening to that story is something that a lot of people find, particularly, well, you have to be somewhat along in life to be able to find it. The thing that you've discovered that you enjoy doing actually resonates all the way through your whole history. And some people are even able to trace that back to childhood. And the fact that you were using your coaching skills as a police officer, and and I wonder how far back in that career you would be able to trace the use of those skills. and whether you could see them in yourself as a teenager or as a child.
Well, yes, I could. I'll tell you why. I didn't like bullies at school,
Mm-hmm.
and I always stood up to bullies, sometimes to my detriment. And I always liked to help other pupils because we're all friendly, apart from the bullies, of course. Um, and when I joined the police, and it may be, I don't know, karma or whatever, you join the police to be a public servant. You join the police to help people, which I did do in terms of the public, and also my colleagues, because we were quite a close-knit bunch. And when I moved up the rank structure, I felt it was my duty or my obligation to help more junior officers progress and develop, sometimes to my detriment when I'd trained someone up to a great level and I'd recommended them for another job and they got the other job with my help and then I had to train somebody else from scratch again. But that didn't bother me because I get great satisfaction out of that. So I guess, looking back at it now, been totally unaware at the time that, I mean, I'm not Buddha. I'm not, I know, anything like that. I'm not anything special. But I just liked helping people because it just felt right. And as you know yourself, Gemma, if it feels right, it generally is right.
Hmm.
So I hope that answers your question, Chris.
Yeah, well, it wasn't just a question; it was also an observation, and being able to find that thread through your
Yeah.
life is, I think, very rewarding. And there may be more than one thread, of course, and but it's really fascinating to see how it opens up people's lives.
Yeah, I know when I was little, we used to. Well, I had a band called Fizzy Pop, and I actually said that the other day when I was with my band, as in we were doing a performance, a gig, and then we were talking about it because I'd got some fizzy pop, as in a drink, some non-alcoholic fizzy drink, and I was like, "Oh, my first band was called Fizzy Pop." So, but that was just something that we just did as kids. We just put together a group of us. We didn't play instruments, but we just sang and danced, and I guess that's what I do now as well. But I do play instruments now, and I have musicians as well. But yeah, it's interesting that thread of what you do when you're younger and what you do naturally as well. What just comes to you without thinking that you're doing it. It's not like you're doing it because, oh, this will make a good business. It's just who you are, and it's just naturally what you do.
And dare I say, it brings you joy.
Hmm.
Yes. Well, that's the most important thing, isn't it? And that means that if it's bringing you joy, then it's going to bring other people joy as well, most likely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And for some business owners, it's incredibly useful to pick up that thread because you can use it in your marketing, and it needn't be a sort of in your face, buy my wonderful coaching or whatever. It's much more about saying, this is how it was for me, and now I'm passing it on, and I'm obviously set in a more incisive way than that when you're dealing with a particular, with particular stories. But I wonder, Gemma, whether luck has anything to do with it.
Yeah, so I've been reading this book by Richard Wiseman called The Luck Factor. 4 simple principles that will change your luck and your life. So I'm going to read them out. I'm going to see if both of you have if you can think, yes, does this happen in my life? Am I doing these things? Or the opposite of, no, I'm not doing these things, and could it potentially do more? So there's actually sub principles. There's 12 sub principles. So I don't know whether I'm going to read them all, but I'll read the 4 principles and then sort of go into a little bit of
I
the
should
sub.
think that'll keep us going.
Yeah. So principle 1 is that lucky people. Oh, so I'll just give a little bit of a background. So it was written by someone who was a magician, and then he became a psychologist, and they did for over 10 years. Psychologist Professor Richard Wiseman has been conducting a unique research project examining the behaviour of over 1,000 volunteers who consider themselves lucky or unlucky, and the results reveal a radical new way of looking at luck. So they found in these results that there were these 4 principles that people who believed they were lucky had in common. So, principle 1 is that they maximize their chance opportunities. So, this means that they have a strong network of luck, and that they are able to be open to the new experiences around them, and people that might maybe have something in common with them, or maybe able to help them out with a business idea, or maybe a potential relationship. So yeah, I don't know whether to ask you first or to go through them all. Would you prefer me to ask on each one or to go through them all?
I think if we do them one at a time, that
Okay, we'll do
will
them
be
one at a
easy
time.
to digest.
So yes, so do either of you, how well do you feel that you do on that one? Maximizing your chance opportunities when you think about your business or your life?
But I think that you have, well, you have to, I shouldn't say that. You
Yeah.
want to grasp the opportunities when they're in front of you, because if you hesitate, someone might grasp it before you. Um, so that to me also includes keeping an open mind.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the, oh, I couldn't do that, I can't do that, it's too difficult, and flipping it around to say, I'm going to give it a go. What's the worst that can happen? I spoke in a presentation last night about failure. We often associate not achieving a particular outcome with failure. But if we didn't try it, we wouldn't know. So we can go back to the comfort zone and say, oh, I'm not doing that, and you'll never know. Whereas if you give it a go, there's a good chance you'll succeed, or at least you'll learn something. So I'm a big believer in grasping the opportunities when they present themselves.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I think I do. I can remember deciding, I think it was in the 1970s when I was at university, that whenever somebody invites me to do something, that I was going to go along and do it. And but I think beyond that, I also made decisions that at the time seemed crazy. I mean, in the 1970s at university, I was incredibly shy. I mean, to the point that I probably needed a coach, a contentment coach at that stage. And I decided to abandon scientific research for community development. Now, shy
Mm.
community workers do not do well, not at all. And it did take a long time, and I needed a lot of support. But I learned the trade, and it is a trade. There are basic principles that you need to learn. I think if I'd had a coach, I would have moved along a lot faster. But I got there under my own steam, and that's really set me up for where I am now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've learned a lot from you, even just of how many networking events you go to and how many things you get involved in as well. If someone has something on, you tend to, if you can make it, you'll be there.
Yeah, and it's also, and one of the things that I do a lot is I'm talking to somebody I've just met, and I think, oh, I know someone that I should connect them to.
Yes.
I do that all the time, and I think that's a really important, and often it's very rewarding. And I seem to have a knack for it because I do get positive feedback. Beyond thank you very much, that was really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you've connected me to a lot of people, including Melissa, who we had on our podcast, and Marie Watson, who I'm going to be doing a workshop with very soon, although it might be over by the time the podcast is out. But we're going to be doing an event on trauma healing through creative practices. So this principle 2 is listen to your lucky hunches. So that's something else that people who said they were lucky do, is they tend to listen to their gut feelings, and they use their intuition, and they take steps to boost their intuition. So how do you fare on that both of you, in terms of when you make decisions, do you use your intuition?
Yes is the short answer, Gemma.
Yeah.
Someone once told me that your gut is your second brain, and there's a connection between the brain here and the brain down here, which may or may not be the vagus nerve, but anyway. My gut instinct has stood me in good stead on many occasions as a police officer and in security, and also in coaching, because I was delighted to find that a lot of the skills and expertise I developed through policing and security actually are transferable to coaching. Listening skills, the ability to identify when people are being less than truthful. So I have pivoted from being a very analytical, logical individual. As you can imagine, because 31 years in the police will do that to you. My job was to find the evidence, so I had to be logical and analytical. But I've pivoted more towards listening to the little voice inside me. So, for example, you're talking about making your own luck. I was offered the chance to become a close protection officer in the police, which meant training with firearms, which I'd never contemplated, never thought about. And it was and I decided, because something told me, go for it. And as I alluded to earlier, I became a close protection officer with a sidearm and got to protect a lot of very well-known people, including politicians and the royal family. But that little, will I do it or won't do it, something prompted me. I always think that if you have a decision to make, how does it feel? And your inner wisdom or your gut instinct or your intuition or whatever it is will give you a good steer, if you like, to making the right decision.
Yeah, definitely. Chris, how about you?
Yeah, I have to be a little bit careful with this sort of thing, because my personality type, which is something that your personality type tends to constrain you, but it does mean that I tend to be perceptive but poor at judgment. So I can trust my observations, but I need longer to process and make the right judgment. And so where there's an important decision, I prefer to sleep on it if I can.
Yeah.
Because usually what then bubbles up the next morning is a lot more reliable than what I was thinking before I slept on it. So that means that in situations where I'm under pressure to make a quick decision, I tend to be at my weakest.
It's good that you have that awareness, though, and that understanding of, because that's part of creating, well, the next part of the book, that's creating luckier lives, as in the working on you. You pick your weakest areas and you work on it, basically. So one of the things they talk about in terms of improving your gut instinct is things like meditation, or taking a bit of time to decide is actually one of the things. So you're saying about that, but that's actually one of the skills. Sleeping on it is actually part of it, because that shows that that you're taking steps to improve your gut instinct.
Well, it tends to be trivial things, and I've had long conversations with people who are the same personality type as mine, and they have exactly the same issue: crossing the road. So if I cross the road with someone of a different personality type, they're on the other side of the road and I'm still stood on the pavement, because what I'm doing is I'm calculating the distance of the cars that are coming in both directions and trying to work out whether they'll hit me. And by the time I've done the calculation, the cars are nearer. And
yeah,
I mean, I do get across the road eventually.
You're trying to work it out from your head instead of your gut. That's why.
That's it exactly.
Yeah.
Spot on. And that is the weakness of my personality type.
Yeah.
We might be brilliant thinkers and all of that, and go into great
Philosophizers.
detail. But at the end of the day, we can't cross the road.
So principle 3 might help you cross the road. It's expect good fortune. So this is people that are lucky tend to expect the future will help them fulfill their dreams and ambitions, and they tend to go for it when it comes to their dreams, even if they might fail. They'll expect that they'll be lucky and that something good will happen. So how do you fare on this one?
I agree.
Yeah.
If you expect good things, they're more likely to happen.
Mm.
I don't know too much about the law of attraction. My wife knows more about that than me. But if you expect good things, they're more likely to happen than if you expect bad things. So it's more than just having a positive mental attitude. Everything will be all right. As an illustration, you have the glass half full, glass half empty philosophy. You have the pessimist and the optimist. Now, I declined to go down either route and I made myself a realist. So, what in my head was, I'm a realist, right? The worst that can happen is this, and I've prepared for it. And if the best thing that happens, that's a bonus. And again, it was my wife that pointed this out. Why are you preparing for something that might not happen? Right. So your realism or your realistic attitude, yeah, okay, I understand that, but it's almost like hope for the best and prepare for the worst. So that was my philosophy. It was no, now it's no, it will be all right. And if it's not all right, I'm not going to worry in advance about it. I will worry when it happens if it doesn't go right, but I'm not going to worry in case something bad happens. So my philosophy now is everything will be fine, and if it's not, I'll deal with it at that time, not be apprehensive before whatever happens. So
Yeah.
that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, so it was interesting because one of the research showed in the book that lucky people do take steps to make sure that so for example, if it was raining outside, the lucky person may take an umbrella, you know what I mean? Like if they wanted to, or they'd just say, I don't mind, I like walking in the rain. Do you know what I mean? But depending on their personality. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's not about being stupid and just going, oh well, I'll it'll be fine, and then not not preparing. It's doing your best, you know, saying, well, I know I'll do my best, and it should be all right, and if it's not, I'll deal with it, like you said. So yeah, Chris, how do you fare on this one?
Oh well, it's the rain, it rains upon the just and on the unjust fella, but more upon the just because the unjust nicks the just's umbrella. And I suppose, in a way, the lucky person in that verse is the unjust fella who's at least gained an umbrella. So I'm not sure where that leaves us. Father used to say, he who expects little shall not be disappointed. And I misinterpreted that for many, many
Mm,
years. I took it to mean that if you're parsimonious with your expectations, then you will be rewarded magically with things beyond. Yeah, I can see Willie's shaking his head. Uh, and then, of course, at one point the penny dropped, and if you expect little, that's what
you
you'll
get
get.
little.
So, and it's there in all the folklore and the little phrases that people use, isn't it? It's
I'm also reminded of, if you want to buy a lottery ticket to win a lottery, you have to buy the ticket. I don't expect to win it, but I know I certainly won't win it if I don't buy a ticket. So you take a preparatory step in the hope that might be the case. But if you don't buy a ticket, it certainly ain't going to happen.
Okay, so this is the last one. This is principle 4. Lucky people turn their bad luck into good. So they're able to see the positive of the bad side, and they're convinced that any ill fortune will, in the long run, work out for the best. And they take constructive steps to prevent more bad luck in the future. So this is probably the one which I find no, I think I find the third hardest, maybe. I don't know. I find that these two are my weaker areas. I'm pretty good with my intuition, and I'm pretty good at connecting with people. I I am good at expecting good things to happen in the future, but I do tend to sometimes dwell on the negatives of the present. I think that's where my weakness is, where if something bad happens, I'll tend to get very stroppy and upset about it. And apparently lucky people don't do that. So but I do consider myself a lucky person, but that's just my area that I need to work on is when something bad happens, it's thinking, well, what could the positive outcome be? And not getting too caught up in the upsets of day-to-day life, if that makes sense.
Very much so. It's like if something bad happens, it's how we cope with it. It's easy to be contented or whatever when life is going swimmingly well. Much more difficult when things are not going so well. But I think we can console ourselves with, you know what, this too shall pass. It's not permanent. Uh, Look for, there's always a silver lining. There's always a silver lining. No matter how poor the situation appears. And the ability to, if you like, I don't know, swap bad luck for good luck or turn a bad thing into a good thing is always look for the silver lining because it's always there, even though it's not immediately apparent to us. So maybe subsequently we'll learn, you know what, I learned something about that, even though it appeared pretty rubbish at the time. So I like a phrase, there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. So every time you think you've failed or something's not gone right, what happens? You learn from it. Is that a good thing? Absolutely. Will you do it the same way the next time? No, you won't. So feedback is an inevitable consequence of a perceived failure. Um, and if we learn from it, we're not going to fail the next time we do it. And then in a different set of circumstances, if we don't achieve our objective, we will learn something. So it's like I'm reminded of the story which I told last night, so I hope Chris will forgive me, of Thomas Edison who invented the light bulb. He apparently did 1,000 experiments before the light bulb would actually work. And someone said to him, "You have failed the 999 times." He said, "No, I've made a trial. I've attempted 999 times until I got successful in the 1,000th. So if he'd done it 999 times, and this might be a story, he was obviously a very persistent individual because he believed he was right and he was proved right. So I'm not suggesting we have to do things 999 times, but if persistence, consistency, and try it to reach where we want to be, uh, learn from our failures, and we will get there. There's always something that we can learn, Gemma. That you think, oh, that was terrible. Well, actually, drill down into it. Not so much. Did I learn from it? Yeah. Will that help me? Will that make me grow? Yes, it will. So, I think luck. And I'm going to cut this short. There was a very famous golfer many years ago, Chris, and it might have been Arnold Palmer or something like that. Very, very long time ago. And someone accused him of being lucky. You're just lucky. He said, you know what? That's a funny thing. You know, the harder I practice, the luckier I get. And the other person looked at him and it was a rebuke. Look, I try very hard. I work very hard at this. I'm not lucky. I train very hard for this. Yeah, the harder I practice, the luckier I get. And I've always remembered that when I'm feeling down or whatever. You know, if I stick at this, with a bit of luck, I'll get where I want to be. So that's me.
Well, thanks, Willie.
I have a little phrase, 4 words that I found extremely helpful. The 4 words sound incredibly negative, but actually they're incredibly positive. And the words are, most things don't work. And as I say, it sounds negative, but actually it's very positive. Because the first thing it says is, when it doesn't work, it's not your fault. Because most things don't work. The second thing it says is, try something else. Now, if you're doing community development, believe me, most things don't work. It took me years. I beat myself up year after year after year because most things don't work. And I thought it was my fault. And then suddenly the penny dropped and I thought, hang on a minute, this is not right. It's just the nature of reality. I mean, what if Edison had stopped after 999 tries? We wouldn't have a light bulb.
It's a bit like the Buddhist thing that says, life is suffering. It's sort of that acknowledgement of seeing that most things don't work, in the sense of, there is a lot of things that go on in human life where people do suffer, and but recognizing that gives you more chance of finding a way to not suffer and a way of helping others not suffer. So on the flip side, that's why Buddhism gives you a tool and a way out of suffering. But the first step is to acknowledge the suffering, and that comes right back to the beginning, when, Willie, you were talking about acknowledging the problem.
Yeah, very much so. If you ignore something, does it go away? Probably not. I had a tooth extracted last week, which wasn't funny, but it was painful and it was bothering me. And the dentist said, I'll have to come out. Now, I could have ignored his advice and be extremely uncomfortable. And for the short time, and it was actually relatively painless, for the short time when he extracted it. Now, ignoring things isn't the way to go, because, well, that could have got worse and worse. I could have gone, oh my goodness, I'll get a mouth ulcer. Oh gosh, what will happen? But I would also use the phrase acceptance. Accept what's going on. It may be rubbish, but can we change it? If we can, fair enough. If not, accept it's rubbish and move on as best you can. Make some positive steps, whatever it is. I've accepted a lot of what's going on in the world because I can't change it. It might make me slightly ratty and it might make me uncomfortable, but once I've accepted it, that's the way it is. I can't do anything about it. I feel a lot more at peace. So I don't know what that got to look. I apologise.
So next we have Chris's. You're going to be talking about lost cities and writing over our past.
Yes, I'm going to begin with this. Can you see what this is?
A blank piece of paper.
A blank piece of paper. Yes, absolutely. How much do you think it's worth?
Not very much.
Some fraction of a penny. They come in reams of 500, so divide 500 into a few quid. Now, if I got into a time machine and went back 200-300 years, this would be incredibly valuable. Paper. And there was a time when paper was so valuable that people reused it. I mean, I have piles of scrap paper and I reuse the other side, but I mean, people would use it for some purpose and then either erase what was on the paper and then write over it, or even hold the paper in portrait and write on that, and then turn it to landscape and write across. And there's a posh word for that. It's called a palimpsest. And historians use it. So when a historian gets hold of a piece of writing, they don't only just read the writing that's on the surface, they've got techniques now where they can go under the surface and see whether there's something else there. Because people did reuse it. And an example recently in the news of something which is like a palimpsest was the discovery of Van Gogh's portrait, a new Van Gogh portrait that's in the back of another painting, and somebody glued paper over it. So they're now trying to work out, they found it through x-rays, and they're now trying to work out whether they can remove the glue and the paper and get back to the original painting that's underneath. And this is very common. And really, we live our lives in a sort of palimpsest, because if you live in an older house, people will have lived there before you, and all their stuff has gone. They either moved out, in which case they loaded everything onto the back of a van and drove away to somewhere else, or they died out and people put everything in a skip and their life vanished, and then you moved in. And we live our lives and we tell our stories on the erased remains of what went before.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I think, a very exciting idea, because it gives us some context. So I live in a city called Sheffield, as you do, Jemma, and it's a big city. Bear that in mind. Now, I've just finished reading this book called Shadowlands by Matthew Green. It's a journey through Lost Britain. And what it's about are villages, towns, and cities that have vanished, just disappeared. And although the book itself focuses on perhaps 6, 7, 8 different places, there are actually hundreds in Britain of places that have completely vanished, just gone. There's a map somewhere in the book with dots on it. There's no point in me showing you it because people can't see it on the podcast. And there's all sorts of reasons why towns and cities and villages disappear. Winchelsea, old Winchelsea, this is in the around about the 1200s, was swallowed by the sea. It was too close to the sea level rose, and it disappeared. So they thought, oh, we're not having this. We'll build new Winchelsea on the top of the cliff. So they built New Winchelsea. And New Winchelsea was it was one of the sank ports, the 5 ports, and one of the things it did, it had 70 cellars where they sampled wine, because they didn't have bottles of wine in those days. They just had casks, and it went off fairly quick. But it would be imported because you couldn't make wine in England, and then people would sample it in those cellars, and then it would go off elsewhere. But gradually the ports silted up, and there eventually was no reason for New Winchelsea to exist, and so it became deserted and disappeared, or virtually disappeared. Dulwich was on top of a cliff and fell into the sea. There's some Scottish ones, St Kilda, which was a community, and for many centuries there were over 100 people living there. And then gradually, as it became known and more tourists and so on, the people began to leave because there were more exciting things to do than live on St Kilda, eating fulmer porridge made out of fulmars, which are seabirds, which doesn't sound terribly good. And that's just another example. And another, this is the last example from the book, is a place in Wales, and sorry, I can never pronounce the second word anyway, so I won't even try. But the Metropolitan Borough of Liverpool decided it needed more water, and they decided to flood the valley in which this community had existed for hundreds of years. And there were massive demonstrations. This is in the 1950s. But in the end, the Borough of Liverpool won, and that community was drowned. And the same sort of thing happened in the 1930s near Sheffield. The Lady Bower Dam, which provides Sheffield with some or all of its water, was built by flooding the town of Derwent. But it's not the nearest city to Sheffield that was erased, because Sheffield itself was erased during the Second World War. And people talk of the history of Sheffield as the tale of two cities, because the whole of the city centre was flattened. If you go and visit somewhere like Leeds, which is close to Sheffield, you can see from the buildings in the city centre of Leeds what Sheffield might have been like had it not been bombed. And I can remember as a child going into town on the bus and seeing certain places where there was building work going on. As a child, I didn't really understand why building work was going on there, but actually it was the rebuilding after the bombing during the Second World War. And we live our lives where over and over again things are cleared away and something new is put there. Go back far enough into Sheffield's past and there were open green fields. I'm sure this is true of Glasgow as well, Willie. And we act out our lives on these palimpsests, these places that have been wiped, cleared, and a new act begins. And our storytelling is really very closely connected with this idea, because the person that we were, well, even a minute or two ago, but certainly sort of 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ago, has been wiped away. They no longer exist. They say that every cell in your body is replaced every 7 years. But in some sense, you're the same person, but your memories are things that it's like the historian looking at and reading what's beneath the writing on the surface. So there's our lives as they are now, but we are also telling stories from what's no longer visible until we make it visible in our storytelling. So that's what I wanted to talk about. And the reason I wanted to talk about it, this is the last thing I want to say, the reason I wanted to talk about it is that a lot of our storytelling is very much about me and my life and my experience. And I want to encourage all storytellers to see whether they can open up their stories to the context and that they're part of something bigger, either historically or geographically, because I think that makes for a good, compelling story.
Yeah, it definitely does. I don't know if you had something to say there, Willie, about this topic.
Well, I'm a bit of a history buff. I like history. I like the phrase, if we don't learn the lessons of history, we're doomed to repeat them. So, for example, my father was called up for military service just at the end of the Second World War. And he ended up in Egypt, of all places, for 2 years, till 1947. I still have some of the letters that he wrote home to his father, my grandfather, who unfortunately died before I was born. And I kept a lot of my father's literature and found a letter from a soldier in the Boer War in 1902 or something to my great 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 aunt or something. I found it fascinating that this had come from South Africa and ended up in my hometown of Johnson, near Glasgow. That from the analogy with the paper, and I understand, Chris, that paper was very very expensive back in the day. Did they not used to write on vellum, like cowhide or something like that, right? So that was a follow-on, but we can kind of rewrite our own story, right? Whether we wipe the slate clean, as in we erase all the writing that's on it, or we superimpose a new story on top of what's already there. I am still the same person I was forever. I put a post in LinkedIn that showed me and a colleague on a rugby tour in Bermuda in 1984. And I'm unrecognisable because I have hair and it's curly and I'm skinny. But I'm still the same person. in terms of me, but I'm a much changed, how can I put it, personality. My outlook, my attitude, my mindset is entirely different to what it was even 5 years ago before I was made redundant. I think we can rewrite our own story, or we can update it, we can edit it, should we choose to do so, but only if it's going to be, if you like, an improvement or a growth or a development. And finally, I'm reminded of when I worked in corporate security, I used to drive, excuse me, down south. To do that, I had to drive across Ayrshire to get to the M74, to get on the M6, and so on and so forth. And I passed a sign to a village which is no longer there. But the claim to fame of that village is where Bill Shankly, the very famous Liverpool manager of many decades ago, was born. It was a mining village, and it was a coal mining area. But eventually, the requirement for coal diminished, and like St Kilda, everyone just left because there was no work, school closed, and so on and so forth. That was quite sad, but I mean, Mr. Shankly went on to marvellous things. So our history doesn't define us, I don't think. What defines us is what we do now, in the here and now. And I've made a choice to do what I'm doing just now. And maybe it's a rebuilding job. I don't know. Maybe the city of Willie has grown from the ashes. I don't know. But I do think we have the ability to rewrite the bit of paper where our life story's on it, and to change it for the better, should we choose to do so.
Yeah. I suppose maybe the point that Chris was making is that, yeah, because obviously we can rewrite our own stories, but we can't really do is rewrite the place, the context of which that story was built. In terms, for example, I can't just suddenly say I'm from Newcastle because I was born in Sheffield. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's some aspects where, yes, of course, we can rewrite our stories in terms of how we perceive ourselves or how we interpret our stories and how we choose to move forward. I could move to Newcastle, that could be a part of a story, but obviously we can't change the past in terms of, you know, what's been before. I'll always have been born in Sheffield. I'll have always moved to London when I was 18 and then come back again. You know, that's part of the story. And I think it's interesting what Chris says about the context of those places and what's happened before, and who lived in your house before, who what was there previously. You know, sometimes you go to places like, there used to be a cinema around the corner from where I live. There isn't now, but it's things like that that are just kind of fascinating, I suppose, in terms of the context of how we see ourselves.
Yeah, you can't rewrite history, although some people have tried to do that. Generally, it's the victors are the ones who write the history. I know you're right. The context. I was born in a particular place. I grew up in a particular place, and so on and so forth. You can't change that aspect. You can't change the facts of that. But maybe rewrite your stories not quite the way I should have put it. You can change. Like we always have a choice. We can stay in our comfort zone, or we can choose to move out of it.
Well, it
And
brings us back round to what we were
yeah,
saying about NLP at the very beginning.
Mm.
You know, the words that you use, you can tell the same story in a negative way or in a positive way. You can always do that. And the challenge for a lot of business owners, of course, is how do I tell this particular story? Because I have a purpose in telling it, you know, a conscious purpose in telling it, not just
and
for
why
entertainment.
as well, like uh the why of why we choose to, what purpose is it for the story, and how can it help others. Sometimes we can use our negative stories in a positive way to help others.
Yes.
Okay, so I think we're near the end of the podcast now. So just want to thank you for listening to us, and to also go and check out some of the other episodes that we have. We've spoken to many people, life coaches, artists, entrepreneurs, and much more. And we do tend to have some themes that we talk about throughout the podcast, and the place is one of those themes, and history we do talk about in some of the other episodes, so do check them out. Also, Willie, where would someone find you if they wanted to have some life coaching?
Well, I think Chris has said he'd be good enough to put the link somewhere, but I just have a new website, which is willienicolcoaching.com, which is a follow-on from contentmentlifecoaching.co.uk. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I have a digital business card, and so on and so forth. I'm very happy to talk to anyone about anything, because I do like to talk, and I'm always interested in new stories. And if, as a result of that, I can help anyone, so much the better.
Well, thank you. And Chris, how do we find you?
Yep. Well, all the details are in the show notes. Nothing much has changed since last time. So I'm hoping to restart Telling Stories Making Business, which is either at 2:00 in the afternoon on Zoom, or for some of them I'll be reintroducing the lunchtime meetings as well. And hopefully they'll be starting in the autumn.
Great stuff. And you can find me on creativehearts.coach on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. And you can find me also on Jemma Rosenthal on all of those same sites. And that's more of my music pages. So you can also listen to my music on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, and YouTube. So, yeah, thank you so much for listening. We have been Find, Tell, Share, the Storytellers podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye for now.